topic that I've talked about?
I'm not sure. I can't imagine anybody doing that.
It's a very unwise thing to do, and it's not because I'm nasty. I treat stupidity and ignorance with violence, and I treat people with great respect and love. In fact, that's why I do what I do. And what I tell people is if they want to match me on an intellectual level or a reference level or science, they're going to lose, and I'm going to leave a mark. And I tell people, I search around the world for top scientists like yourself that develop technology. That's why we have, for example, the German-based Allison Med, which is equivalent in terms of the number of this ability to release Allison, but 200 milligrams more than Alamed, which is double the price. And we still carry our Alamax and Alamed because we have a lot of people that like it. But our most important nutraceutical in NutriMeds, and we have several hundred, is Nutriodine. People say, why is that, Dr. Daigle? I said, well, the first thing is, what is the basis of all illness? Let's talk about this, because some of these things are kind of trade secrets, and I release kind of little pieces of it, but I'm not going to release the whole thing, because a lot of people will try to take my knowledge and kind of run with it, try to pretend all of a sudden it's theirs. Just like I did the research with Dr. Otto Hewen at the University of Calgary and got persecuted and threatened to have my license pulled for doing research with the head of pathology, by the way, department of the University of Calgary, which is a big department. And we had lots of money to do our research. And I don't trust the medical profession. I don't trust even publication. If I publish something, believe me, I'm going to make sure I get all the credit because I want people to quote me and my references. They don't twist the science. Now, the most important thing that's happening right now is what's called global extinctional event, omnicide, and the primary target is mitochondria. Since the Second World War, there's been tens of thousands of chemicals added to the biosphere. Most of these are halides that are not radiotoxins. So besides above-ground nuclear testing, where they used to test baby teeth for strontium back in the 60s, the worst toxins out there are basically halides, chloride, bromide, and fluoride. And a lot of cities now have adopted the use of chloramines, which is 100,000 times more likely to produce DNA adducts of your chromosomes than even chlorine. And when you fluoridate water, or when you buy bottled water from, say, Pepsi Corp., which puts about 400 parts per million fluoride, you cannot detox this with anybody else's iodine except ours, period, because it's not in a high enough energy state. We have the only monoatomic high-energy form of Tesla-activated iodine in the world, period. Now, the important factor is that right now what's going on, there's three main factors that cause all illness. And it came out recently with the story about Dr. Bartlett, who was shot in the chest and died in a river in North Carolina. I was one of the primary researchers, and I just got my notice from the American Academy of Environmental Medicine and about Dr. Gonzalez, another colleague who's working against vaccines. And the reason why this is all tied together is vaccines either have in them or activate the production of a thing called nagalase. And I'll give you the fancy long term. It's alpha-N-acetyl-galactosaminidase. Okay? And I can repeat that, because I know the biochemistry backward and forward. And the problem is this is produced by viruses, it's produced by bacteria like E. coli and pathogens. It's induced by cancer cells, and alpha-N galactosaminidase levels, or acetylaminidase levels, are directly linked with the body burden of cancer. Now, cancer rates have gone through the ceiling. When I went to medical school in 1973, that's 42 years ago, cancer rates were 1 person in 12. It's less than 1 in 2 now. We see childhood cancers, weird cancers, people getting multiple cancers. They get one cancer, then they get another. Of course, it's not surprising. A lot of the treatment they get from their doctor, or the drugs they use for disease modification, like for rheumatoid, like Ambrel, infliximab, metazolimab, and these other disease-modifying drugs for, say, psoriasis and lupus, actually suppresses arms of your immune system to act as surveillance against cancer. The primary thing that causes disease is a low redox state. Now, that term sounds fancy. Redox means you're not able to convert sugar or fatty acids through the fatty acid ASL process to create pyruvate, and pyruvate goes through the Krebs cycle to create ATP, as in adenosine triphosphate, or NADH. Now, if you cannot raise your redox state of your tissues, so we would call an hypoxic or low redox state, because they're equivalent. When your tissues are hypoxic, basically, or a low redox, even if you're breathing oxygen, your cells act as if they're not getting oxygen. So a diabetic has their cells in a low redox state, which is why they're 6 times more likely to have a stroke, heart attack, or get cancer. Every disease known is a acidotic, low redox state that's hypoxic. The three factors go together. And the primary thing to reverse that, besides things like mild hyperbaric oxygen, acetylcarnitine, D-ribose, CoQ10, ubiquinol, CoQ10 supreme, etc., the most important factor is Nutrimedical. For three reasons. It makes new mitochondria that are fresh and gets rid of the old ones that are starting to fire off sparks and free radicals and so on. In other words, like an engine that's starting to wear down. Yep. And number two, those mitochondrial numbers are actually getting destroyed. They're getting reduced. So the cell doesn't have the proper energy to maintain cellular function. So if it's in your astroglia in your brain and you're no longer metabolizing sugar because you don't have insulin receptors and you don't have enough medium-chain triglycerides such as coconut oil, your astrocytes can't fire, so you don't form a neural network, and basically you become demented. So diabetes of the brain basically is a low redox state. So all, not just some disease, is a low redox state that the cells are effectively not making pyruvate, they're making lactate, and they don't generate enough ATP for each glucose molecule or fatty acids with the fatty acid transport mechanisms, etc. So I'm getting into some fancy biochemistry here, but the fact is that knucklehead doctors that don't know the biochemistry, don't know intermediate metabolism, don't know toxicology, don't understand that there's a mitochondrial apocalypse. Dr. Broder Barnes proved that there is no such thing as heart disease. It isn't in the case of hypothyroidism. Now, he had a very broad term, hypo, because back then, when Broder Barnes was working, they were using glandulars, which are far more effective than synthetics. And the reason synthetic is not, and I'm going to repeat this for any knucklehead doctor who thinks he knows better than me, T4 is not thyroid hormone. It's a prohormone. It has to be converted to T3. The average half-life of T4 is 36 hours. The average half-life of T3 is 5.5 minutes. It's converted to reverse T3, to T2 and reverse T2, or the body switches from T3 to reverse T3 and it blocks the receptor. And when it blocks it, because in diabetics and people under stress have high reverse thyroid hormone, they're hypometabolic. Okay, it's a different subclass of hypothyroidism, so you don't necessarily have to have antithyroid antibodies, antimicrosomal antibodies, or your glands being attacked because you had an adenovirus or a toxin. You can be hypometabolic, which all heart disease, all diabetes, all disease states are basically acidotic, low electron density, low oxygen, period. That's why mild hyperbaric oxygen helps along with Nutrimedical. That's why adding NADH, acetyl-L-carnitine, Vascucare are all those special forms of carnitine as well as our CoQ10 and things like mitochondrial catalyst, uridine, etc., which are pyrimidines to increase mitochondrial function. Mitochondrial catalysts will raise your redox state. But the most important, by a huge margin, is Nutrimedical. The second thing Nutrimedical does is it prevents pathogens from entering tissue planes. And it does it by a number of mechanisms. The first one is it directly fries the redox system of bacteria and viruses, so they can't enter tissue planes. It also inactivates their way of taking over a thing called the Fenton reaction, where they need free iron and heavy metals to enter tissue. So if you've got free iron in your extracellular space around tissues, it can enter, but Nutrimedical inactivates or prevents that. It also, Nutrimedical does something else really remarkable. It's the primary stimulus for your stem cells. And the way it works is it works by stimulating an ancient molecule called proteolin. And it turns out proteolin is present in the fetus in every tissue. Every tissue in a fetus, whether it's your skin, heart, lungs, whatever, has lots of proteolin. And not only just humans, right back to invertebrates, like we're talking about fish, okay? Proteolin is a very, very ancient molecule, okay? And it only persists in the hypothalamus, the jejunum, and the argentifin cells, and in the sexual organs into adulthood. And when you make T3, you release proteolin from your jejunum cells, argentifin, which is the anti-aging molecule. We talked about this before. TRH, which they call TRH, which is not just in your thyroid, in your hypothalamus, but it's the most is in your upper jejunum. Now, I like to get a little technical because people need to know that beside my statements about Nutrimedical and the protocols, there's science behind it. Linus Pauling came up many years ago. We had 3 Nobel Prizes in chemistry, including the discovery of vitamin C in his clinic in Edinburgh, Scotland, which raises electron density in the body. I call vitamin C liquid electrons. It's the same term that Linus Pauling used. And when you want to raise electron density, you use basically these following things: Nutrimedical, NADH, acetylcarnitine, Care, CoQ10 Supreme, CoQ10 Ubiquinol. But the most important of all of them is Nutrimedical. Power C, which is the only neutral pH vitamin C in the world, and we use the apoptogenic agents. Metaquinone 7 full vitamin K2, ellagic acid from the terminal and Shibuya, 300 times higher concentration than pomegranate, and Malignoblock developed from the sulforaphane glycosinolate from the broccoli seed extract, which is these are all apoptogenic DNA repair agents. The most important thing people realize is that all disease states are related to low redox acidotic state, the presence of toxins in the tissues and stealth pathogens, and the cells under stress respond by, quote, gene switching. That's what cancer is. Cancer is an infection, period. It's an infection in tissues that are in low redox acidotic state, and they're anaerobic, which is why when we give Malignant Rest, developed by Dr. Sven Georgi, which, by the way, we private label, it's used in 26 countries to treat cancer patients, whether they're going through conventional or non-conventional therapy. But I tell people, if you've got cancer, you want to be slapping that cancer with Nutrimedical. We're talking about up to several hundred drops a day. And the reason is, when you go into high redox state, cancer cells can't survive because they're anaerobic. Disease states can't survive, whether it's tuberculosis, nanobacteria in your artery walls, forming plaque, diabetes, which is a low redox state. That's why diabetics, if you measure the level of nagalase in their blood, which is, again, a factor stimulated by the stealth pathogens and the activation of these inflammatory molecules that shut off their granulocyte activation to fight cancer, which is why it's 6 times higher. You can do a blood nagalase level if people contact me, because I believe in validation rather than just kind of theorizing. You can measure your nagalase level. If you're diabetic, you're going to have a much higher rate of cancer, senile macular degeneration, glomerular sclerosis, and peripheral neuropathy, and heart attacks and strokes. So Nutrimedical helps to reverse all of these. And again, it's not just a magic bullet, but it's the most important of the magic bullets. Interesting science. You probably haven't heard some of this before, because when I hear people who pretend to be experts and have written books on this, they're talking about stuff that I proved it was only a partial or incomplete or a wrong answer 30 years ago doing research with the head of pathology with advanced testing like the proteolin challenge test I brought from Germany, the reverse T3 test, and other metabolites we measured. So when I hear people who think they're experts, you are welcome into my parlor, said the spider to the fly. Now, come into my cage match for Miss Martial Arts. It's going to be very unpleasant because you're dealing with Deagle. I can think faster than you can think by mega speeds. I have a near photographic memory, and I've been doing this for a very long time because I'm driven to find the cause of illness, especially things like diabetes and cancer. And when I see all the population dying, and again, when you've got Fukushima Daiichi giving radiotoxins, we've got halides, so there's 7 new poisons every day, and most of these are halides. So when you see Pepsi Corp, when they make bottled water, most of the bottled water Pepsi Corp and these bottling companies have has had roughly 400 parts per million fluoride. Do you think you can detox fluoride with the other garbage thyroids that other people are selling? Not. So, John, when you hear about these other people who pretend to be experts, and you hear what I just gave a dissertation on some of the advanced science, which, by the way, if you're a subspecialist in endocrinology, your head should be spinning if you're trying to absorb what I just said. If it's not, and again, remember, everything I'm saying ties back to Linus Pauling, because I presented 5 years ago technology, how to make a field ion scanner that Linus Pauling theorized years ago, which basically measures your electron density and the spectral pattern of the electrons in all your tissues of your body in 4-dimensional space. I know how to do it. Now, I just have to have millions of dollars to build a machine, but I'm not going to let my ideas get out and be stolen, because I've had lots of ideas stolen by people who then ran with parts of them, not understanding it fully. And I certainly don't want to turn it into a weapon, just like my research on scalar biophysics. So, John, Nutrimedical is a miracle molecule. This is an atomic form of iodine. It's in a high state. It lasts for years if you keep it refrigerated and away from light, and the bottle's vertical. We fixed the stopper problem. We replaced all those bottles. I tell people, if there's one thing you want to have when we call the apocalypse happens, whether it's infection because the government spreads plagues, or there's a radiation surge from tsunamis striking Cumbre Viejo, the Azores, hitting all the nuclear reactors along the U.S. coast, or and Britain and France, or they decide to strike the Bashar reactor and you now have a surge of radiotoxins circulating the planet, you want lots of Nutrimedical. And it's not just blocking radioiodine 131, it's going to resurrect your mitochondria. And as your mitochondria die, things start happening. For example, the people in Japan that break the black rain, what happened to them is they got a massive surge of radiotoxins, and if they didn't have meso super detoxification, they quickly developed walking gangrene, which means that literally their limbs and their fingers started to fall off as they became massively septic.
Terrible.
Yeah, people don't understand this. They don't understand that the globalists are a bunch of devils, and they are purposely not. For example, when we transferred the transnational corporations, transferred industry to China, 93% of the mercury that's falling in your air, food, and water that's in your veggies, now even if they're organic veggies, is coming from China using dirty coal. Every day there's 7 new biotoxins in the biosphere allowed by the government because they don't certify them. They have only 34 biotoxins in water they certify out of 10,500 plus, and 7 more every day, that are directly toxic to human biology and other animal systems, including our soil, food, water, and the biosphere. 7. And the government tries to pretend that they're legally protecting us because they protect 34 of those 10,500 plus and 7 new every day. The government are a bunch of criminals, they're liars, and the medical profession, the scientific profession, are a bunch of gutless jellyfish who won't face the music, that they themselves don't have a comprehensive theory. And when they do have knowledge, like the biologists are out in the oceans talking about the death and desertification of the northern Pacific Ocean, they're not gutsy enough to tell the truth that the oceans are dying, like Chernobyl, which is wormwood, read out of the Bible, because they won't face it. And the actuaries analyzed and said within the first 6 months after Fukushima Daiichi, 45,000 people in America, adults, died, and the fetal death rate in neonatal intensive care units went up almost 40% within 6 weeks after Fukushima on the East Coast in Pennsylvania, United States. So what people need to understand is, I feel like a voice speaking in the wilderness with a bunch of midget minds, idiots, and unqualified people making statements or not making any statement based on science or can be validated when we could validate these. I've asked Senator Feinstein and Senator Wyden why they haven't had a radiation expert doing proper food, water, and air sampling. I asked Dr. Kai Vetter at the University of California, Berkeley, Department of Nuclear Engineering. At first I thought, well, you're just Dr. Deagle, MD. And they realized I was a radiochemist, expert in nuclear physics, radiotoxicology. Then he freaked. He realized I had him pinned down like a bug on one of the little bug mats with pins, and I was going to put him through his PhD thesis on the spot. It wasn't pleasant. And he wouldn't communicate with me afterward, email, and they shut down all their testing. So if you're not taking Nutridyne today or giving it to your pets, I'm not going to say God help you, because you already heard the warning. And welcome back to Nutrimedical Report, and we are trying to contact Karen and Campbell in Mount Red Velvet, New Zealand. Do we have Ron? Oh, we have Karen. You're on time, but your split second, you just made it. My gosh, you must have a tight calendar.
Yes, we do. Sorry, we had a little issue with Skype this morning.
Yeah. I'm putting together, in fact, this weekend I think will be the final framework for my paper that I'm presenting in December. I'm going to give people kind of like a mini preview of it. I am presenting, there's 10,000 labs in the world, by the way, working on the idea of trying to regenerate organs, tissues, and regenerate people's tissue. And I like people to kind of, like when they go to Tomorrowland and Disneyland up in Santa Ana, California, or they go to the Florida version or the European version. Disney was an interesting guy. He liked to kind of imagineer the future. And so he brought in all kinds of experts, and he had an ability to kind of look forward to things like monorail and so on. But I'm going to imagineer a world where it's not the dark world of globalists forcing vaccinations and geoengineering the weather and screwing up the climate and the financial system and a debt-based economy, crashing economies like Greece. It's a world where your biggest expense is life insurance, which basically is a right. You have a right to life insurance, just like a right to health care. You don't have to have a premium. And everybody has a monitor to monitor life parameters, plus they can monitor their bioplasmatic body to determine their health of their bioplasmatic body, which leads to pathology. It doesn't guarantee it, but it leads it to it. And the bioplasmatic technology is things like QRMA, Bioplasm Clinical, which is the most advanced, similar to the Metapathia in Russia. The Bioplasm Pro and Expert I already have today, and we do have the Metapathy equivalent available for big clinics and doctors because it's expensive. But I want to understand, in the future, people won't just say, well, I think Mountain Red Velvet's good, so I make good joints. No. We'll have surgical versions that we can give by intravenous when somebody has a heart attack or a stroke or they're trying to regenerate their liver or an organ. We'll be using that in what's called organ bioengines, where we'll actually take a sample of your cells and grow a new limb for you, and in 3 or 6 months when it's time to transplant it, we can transplant it where you've had a traumatic loss of a finger or an arm or a hand in say, a military accident or whatever. We will be able to reverse the aging process, so we will reach in the next 5 to 20 years zero senescence, but it'll be a combination of using extracellular matrix, scalar signals, and specific biomolecules to affect the epigenetics of tissue. And we've had Dr. Bob Dennis on the program, and what I'd like to do is intellectually kind of dissect exactly why everybody else is failing. They're failing because they don't understand the most important single component missing is ECM. In fact, we talked to Dr. Bob the other day. He said what they're using is off-label things that the fatal drugs allowed people, I call them the FDA, which are a bunch of idiots. These people are dangerous, certified criminals and idiots, and corrupt idiots. And they certified certain molecules to be used to kind of stick cells together to try to create, new tubes for, ureters or bladders or whatever. It doesn't work. Their success rate is abysmal. In the last 30 years, they've been publishing papers saying they're going to regenerate organs. Well, you can regenerate the organs in your own body. In fact, I had a diabetic the other day contact me and he said his kidneys were zapped by taking Arthrotek. He was a pharmacist, and he was diabetic. And I said, well, the first thing you need to do is you need to have the power ones. Oxygen, Nutrimed's energetic technology, which includes scalar and stem cells. Now, the stem cells, we wanted to see sometimes something like Mountain Red Velvet works in several of these. It's a Nutrimed that acts as a scalar transducer. What it does is not only it has building blocks to rebuild the tissue, it actually has transmembrane proteins that actually change the scalar signals to tell the DNA to turn on and off to make messenger RNA to transcribe to enzymes and structural proteins. So if you don't have ECM, in other words, look at what a fetus is. Proteroline, which is TRH, is in every tissue. Ergothioneine is activated throughout the fetus. And every tissue in the fetus has macho amounts of extracellular matrix, which means there's incredibly fast apoptosis occurring where the fetus is destroying cells and tissues but rebuilding new cells and tissues. And when you want to rebuild a joint, like your knee joint or your meniscus, you want to rebuild your brain because you got a post-hypoxic brain injury from a cardiac arrest, or you've had transcranial radiation therapy, or had a pulmonary embolus, or you ended up with a near drowning accident. You need to have the extracellular matrix. So I tell people there's virtually no health condition, whether it's losing your hair. We had a gentleman this morning who called and he said, I'm taking Recidivil and Collagen Max, because everybody wants to take the minimal things and figure they're going to get the miracle cure. And I say, look, if you want to get cured, you need to follow Deagle's program, which is don't take 2 things out of 5 or 6 that are going to make you better and figure the 2 things are going to get you 1/3 of the way there. If you're not better in 4 to 6 weeks with your hair growing back, you need to add Mountain Red Velvet next, and Lumen Photon, and things release growth hormone like Microdose and Supernox, or etc. So,
and that's
in other words,
what we say.
Yeah, and if you're trying to regenerate your joints, yes, it's important to have Collagen Max, tendon and joint performance, but if you don't have the building blocks for everything else you need around the connective tissues, how the heck do you expect to regenerate those tissues? You're not a fetus, which that's the tagline below it. You're not a fetus, so take Mountain Red Velvet. And if you want to photocopy yourself into the future, you need the right toner. That toner is Mountain Red Velvet to reproduce you, because you're not the same individual even 10 years ago. That individual is gone. You gradually, step by step, have been disassembled and reassembled since 10 years ago. You may resemble them, you may be older, paunchy, or whatever. You are not biologically the same. You'll contain some memories from that individual, but in actual physical fact, the cells and structure that made up that individual 10 years ago don't exist, except for a few stray neurons. The rest of you has been rebuilt.
And that's what we hear from athletes who have had a long-term injury, and they're micro injuries because they still keep going, but oh gosh, that shoulder's hurt for years. But when they take Mountain Red Deer Velvet, they say, oh, it doesn't hurt anymore. Or my knees don't hurt. Or my back doesn't hurt. And it's not just for pro athletes. It's the mums and dads who are doing repetitive work as well. You know, mums who are up and down, you know, with toddlers up and down off the floor and, you know, oh, my knees hurt. Well, take the building blocks, as you say. There's 396 different ingredients in every single capsule, and it heals the body. It doesn't mask the symptoms of pain. It heals the body.
Right, and we're working on various things to advance it. Like we get certification in Australia to have the market size to justify DR caps, which is will preserve the capsule contents up to a pH of 2, so it gets to the terminal ileum. So the terminal ileum can convert it to a micelle and deliver it through the splanchnic circulation to your body tissues in micelles, which means it's much more biologically efficient to deliver fragile molecules that otherwise would be destroyed by your stomach and gut acids and your pancreatic enzymes. You can do that also by putting it on your tongue, which is going to help a lot too. But eventually we're going to have surgical versions. We'll have an IV version, a surgical strips. We'll have granules for surgeons to put in. We'll have people who have infusions where people take Mountain Red Velvet infusions while they're in a drug-induced coma in a what I call regeneration unit, where we put them in a mild hyperbaric regeneration unit, give them, you know, trace galactic gases. There's research going on at the University of Pittsburgh using trace amounts of nitric oxide, hydrogen sulfide, and others to actually induce specific enzymes to protect you and induce cellular regeneration. We'll be giving people like things like extracts of mushrooms like ergothionine, along with Mountain Red Velvet in a surgical version. We'll be using stem cells either off the counter stem cells or taking your own stem cells and multiplying them in a culture lab, and then firing in with stem cell we call amplification agents, usually natural molecules or bioengineered, so that in 2 weeks after you're coming up from your traumatic accident and you've had the surgery kind of close all the holes and fix everything, you're rebuilt. But you can do that today. All you need to do is order Mountain Red Velvet, take it daily. It's going to put you up on the hoist and lube job you, fix your brain, fix your heart, fix your eyebrows and your hair and your nails are going to first thank you. They're going to get beautiful. And if besides not wrinkling on the outside, you're not going to wrinkle on the inside. So Mountain Red Velvet and Collagen Max is step 1 and 2. We got lots more after that. So take care and welcome back. And we have our special guest Ron Patterson talking about Lumen Photon. Actually, you know what? I have my Lumen machine on my neck and head right now. You know, I do things that will sometimes aggravate or do things where I'm in the process of recovering. In the last few months, I pulled all of the last of my mercury amalgams out and readjusted my bite. And I have beautiful white zirconium porcelain crowns now, so my teeth look like I never had a cavity in my life. And I got all the dang mercury out of my mouth. But, of course, as you adjust your bite, which is now perfect because my dentist is awesome, Jeffrey Curbs over at Escondido, one of the top-rated dentists in this part of the world. He's a biological dentist. Less than 16% of dentists, by the way, are safely removing mercury, and now less than 50% are putting it in them. So if your dentist is pulling out mercury and he's not using biological dental protocols, he's committing mercuriocide. Now, why is that important? Well, if you want to detox tissues, you want to use Lumen Photon over your head and neck, which I'm doing right now, literally while I'm on air. If you're trying to turn off, you know, inflamed muscles and so on because you're, you know, adjusting your body, your muscles open 4 or 5 hours a day because the dentist is working on it, which I've had a lot lately. I'm basically just done one more quick visit in the morning, so you won't see me missing from the airtime anymore. I have presciently beautiful teeth now. I am now like a dental cyborg, if you want to call it. And I tell people, I say, you got to detox, and the problem is when you take out those toxins, or the source of them like mercury, or you're in the process of mobilizing toxins, whether you're using infrared sauna or pulse magnetic field, you got to have the nutraceuticals there to present to grab the dang things when they're released. But Lumen Photon is one of the best toxin mobilizers. You can slap it over your liver if you've got hepatitis. You can put it over your kidneys if you're trying to regenerate kidney function. And you can take our nutraceuticals like Mountain Red Velvet, Microdose, Supernox, release growth hormone. You can take the vein away to help the kidney function, the glomeruli heal, and ultrathymine B1. The Lumen Photon, what it does is it raises what's called a signal-to-noise ratio. The engineering principle is the biological molecules vibrate and tell the cells and membranes exactly what the molecule concentration is and which enzymes or metabolic processes to activate or turn off. And the concentration in solution actually works as we call, and this is the fancy term, a nonlinear stochastic parallel processing computer. Every cell is a nonlinear stochastic fuzzy logic processing parallel computer. And so, in other words, each cell literally is a supercomputer. Okay, that's a fancy mathematical term for it.
Wow.
So when your cells are working that way, lumen basically what it does is amplifies the signal. It's almost like when you can't hear something and you're trying to dial in and you're, let's say, a ham radio operator, and you dial your signal to noise and you kind of try to get the bandwidths and whatever. All of a sudden, and it comes in, it's clear, and then you can hear the other person on the other side of the world because your signal's bouncing off the ionosphere. Well, that's what lumen does. It has 7 basic frequencies in eco, and it tunes into the frequency of the tissue, whether it's ectoderm, endoderm, or mesoderm. 3, 4, 5. And of course, frequency 1 is the highest energy. Frequency 7 is the least, is the highest frequency, and it's the most anti-inflammatory. So 7 and 6. And NICO is a combination of frequencies that they use for treating what's called NICA, which is periodontal, destructive myelitis, where the bone starts to retract. Because membranous bone doesn't get stents; it retracts away from your teeth. So your teeth fall out because your Sharpei fibers are torn. So, what people should understand is lumen photon is like an infrared band-aid for almost anything. Whether you're losing hair, you're trying to regenerate your eyes. In fact, they did an experiment on animals, and if they injected them with toxins that would make the animals 100% go blind, lumen is 100% successful at blocking that. So if you've got senile macular changes, glaucoma, optic neuritis, because you had MS or just a random optic neuritis, you need to be on lumen every day. If you've had coronary artery disease and high calcification scores, or if you've had a stroke, or you're prone to migraines, you want to take our Power Methyl B12 under your tongue, CoQ10 ubiquinol, bite it and hold it under your tongue. Take BioLVR at least twice a day, Methyl. And you want to put your brain through lumen photon therapy every day, and you won't have migraines anymore. They'll just not happen. Because you turn it on, and you actually turn down what's called a microglia. If you have a child with autism, they're BOF, their brain on fire, they have upregulation of the microglia. The treatments are DAN protocol, ultrathymine B1, cytidine, choline, uridine monophosphate, and free radical scavengers, cell detox glutathione, Regenerex, Nutricella, and carnosine. You want to repair the myelination with Neurogen, Nutrifos, and Omega Supreme Krill, Copper Regenemax, and Minerals Plus, Vitamineral Max. And you want to have transcranial therapy, transcranial lumen therapy. So you take these little kids and put a lumen on their head, and guess what happens? Their blood-brain barrier and their metabolic activity of their brain starts to cool down and stop being on fire. It's like if you want to call it a metabolic fire engine. It goes in there and sprays down those cells and says, cool off, cool off. You don't need to be so hot. And it'll help, along with mild hyperbaric oxygen and our supplements. And, of course, we also have GMAF now, which if you contact me, I can get it for you from Europe. Or I can show you how you can do it yourself. So you don't have to go through me. You can just do it yourself. So, Ron, what do you think? That's pretty exciting stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, because it was when we were first running into all this, nobody really knew what was going on. So,
well, I can describe it in mathematics. I presented a paper with quantum energy transfer equations 33 years ago to a panel of biophysicists at the University of Calgary, and I built 12 machines with my theory. I had a PhD electrical engineer I was working with, Gary, won't mention his last name. And I had machines from Europe where I had actually been playing around with pulse magnetic field machines and doing experiments, and developed this theory, which thank God I didn't publish it, because it turned out 8 years later I was working, and I happened to, because of my clinical exposure, be exposed to the government using some scalar weaponized weaponry that they're using and deploying later on in Gulf War 1 and 2. So people need to understand the theories that I have. Thank God these idiots in government and the military don't have them, because they turn into the deadliest weapon in history, and more subtle. In other words, a nuclear bomb just goes flash and everything just fries. What about a weapon that you could tune into someone's DNA or their specific biology of a specific organism and fry it, and there'd be no evidence that you actually killed it? Or, which is why my buddy in the NSA said, hey, come on to the parking lot, Bill. This is 94. I said, why? He said, well, you know, what's that in your trunk? He said, that's my satellite pager. I said, I thought you were retired. He said, well, we used to be double tapped if you're retired, which means. I said, what does that mean? I thought it sounds like tap dancing. He said, no, 22 caliber to the forehead and 22 to the left ventricle, because they don't like master exit wounds. He said, but now we don't do that anymore. We use scalar weapons where we hit him with a collimated terahertz microwave weapon and can give him cancer, heart attack, deep vein thrombosis, or whatever. So some of these doctors that seemed to die with relatively good health recently, they were against vaccines, they were probably, I call, foster-sized. Well, you can actually reverse a lot of illness if you just raise the redox by slapping the lumen photon over the injured body part. Whether it's a shin splints because you're running your legs off, or tendinitis, or abdominal pain because you got, premenstrual syndrome, or you've got headaches because you have migraines, or you've had a lot of dental pain because you recently had a whole ton of dental work, or, ozone therapy, YAG laser, and scraping out right down to your bone. If you want to heal, or if you want to protect your eyes, you want to slap that lumen photon. We have lots of testimonies. I have a gentleman who just emailed me, who's a doctor in Malaysia. He followed my recommendations of mild hyperbaric oxygen, or Nutrimeds, and lumen on his head. And guess what? All the spasticity from his stroke, all of his neurological problems are gone. They're gone. And his conventional doctors over there could do absolutely nothing. Now, how come I can treat somebody in Scotland, or Malaysia, or Russia, or South Africa, or Australia, or Kiwi land, New Zealand, and make them better with my recommendations when the doctor standing 4 feet in front of them can't? Because they are idiots. How's that? And it's not a matter of being arrogant. It's a matter of the fact that I'm competent and they're not. And the reason why I'm confident is I question my own thought patterns, and I have ways of validating with testing, imaging, organic acids, other tests to prove what I'm saying is true. In fact, what I was doing back in Denver, I had a microchip analyzer to measure the spectral pattern of body energy pathways in microvolts and picoamps, so I can actually tell you the spectral pattern over those key energy points in the body using a spectral analyzer used for microchip industry. Have you ever heard of a doctor doing that? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I'm it. So, that's why I say repeatedly, there is nobody competing me. If you want to compete with me, you want to challenge me,
I'll wrestle
it'll
with
be
you,
a dark day for you, trying to think that you know more than me out there, and I am there to help the people get better and provide a new level of science. So, as the 21st century rolls on, Dr. Deagle will be remembered, still be around, hopefully, if I get zero senescence, causing trouble. And we'll make many more Dr. Deagle-like individuals out there that will think independently, fight for the truth, do the right thing despite their colleagues clawing at them, and make people